Lieutenant Commander Ji-woo Park had been standing at attention for 43 minutes when she felt the small weight press against her left boot. The observation deck of the Eternal Horizon gleamed under carefully adjusted lighting. The diplomatic reception had been planned down to the smallest detail. Every crew member wore their dress uniform. Every surface had been cleaned until it sparkled. Captain Hyun-soo Choi stood at the front of the assembled officers. His posture perfect as he spoke with the Valerian ambassador. Ji-woo kept her eyes forward, her hands clasped behind her back. As the ship's xenobiologist and cultural liaison, she had spent 3 months preparing for this moment. The Valerians were known across the galaxy for their pride and their strict customs. Getting this meeting right could mean a powerful alliance for humanity. Getting it wrong could mean war. The Valerian delegation stood across from the human officers. They were tall. These aliens, with fur that seemed to shimmer between gold and silver in the light. Their eyes were large and amber-colored, with vertical pupils that reminded Ji-woo of cats from Earth. But there was nothing soft or playful about them. Every movement spoke of controlled power and ancient dignity. Ambassador Tathra spoke in a deep, rumbling voice that the translator rendered into perfect standard. She was explaining the history of Valerian space exploration, the territories they controlled, the alliances they had considered and rejected over the centuries. That was when Ji-woo felt it. Something warm and small pressed against her boot. She did not look down. Every instinct screamed at her to check, to see what had touched her. But military discipline held firm. She kept her gaze fixed on the middle distance, her face neutral. The weight shifted. Something soft and furry leaned more heavily against her leg. Then, she heard it. A tiny sound, barely louder than a whisper. The sound of a child breathing in sleep. Ji-woo's heart began to race. She had studied Valerian customs extensively, had memorized dozens of protocols and taboos, but nothing in her research had prepared her for this exact situation. A child, a Valerian child, sleeping against her boot. She risked the smallest glance downward. The cub was tiny, perhaps only reaching her knee if he stood. His fur was a soft cream color, darker around his small ears and the tip of his tail. He had curled himself into a tight ball against her boot, one small paw tucked under his chin. His chest rose and fell with the deep, even breathing of exhausted sleep. Ji-woo's mind raced through everything she knew about Valerian culture. Children. Sleep. What did her research say about sleeping children? Then she remembered. Her blood went cold. The sleep vigil, one of the most sacred Valerian customs. When a child fell asleep in the presence of another, that person was honor-bound to maintain the vigil until the child woke naturally. To disturb a sleeping child, to wake them before they were ready, was considered one of the worst possible offenses. It suggested the child was not safe. It broke a fundamental trust. Ji-woo forced herself to remain calm. She could not move her leg. She could not step away. She certainly could not wake the cub. To do any of those things would insult the entire Valerian delegation. She became aware that the observation deck had gone very, very quiet. Captain Choi had stopped speaking mid-sentence. His eyes were fixed on something below Ji-woo's waist. Every human officer in the room had noticed. They stood frozen, uncertain what to do. The Valerian delegation had noticed too. Ambassador Tathra's amber eyes moved from the captain to Ji-woo. The ambassador's expression was unreadable, but her ears had swiveled forward in a position that Ji-woo's research suggested indicated intense interest. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Captain Choi did something that would later be called either brilliant or insane. He continued his sentence, but in a whisper so soft it was barely audible. As I was saying, Ambassador, we hope this marks the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship between our peoples. He spoke so quietly that everyone in the room had to strain to hear him. The message was clear. The reception would continue, but it would continue in silence, so the sleeping cub would not be disturbed. Ambassador Tathra's eyes widened slightly. Her ears twitched. Then, very slowly, A rumble started deep in her chest. It took Jiwoo a moment to realize the ambassador was purring. "Captain Choi," the ambassador said. Her voice dropped to match his whisper. "It seems my youngest grandson has found your officer." Acceptable. Grandson. The cub was the ambassador's family. Jiwoo fought the urge to look down again. She had the grandson of the Valerian ambassador sleeping on her boot. If she moved wrong, if she made a single mistake, the diplomatic consequences would be catastrophic. "Lieutenant Commander Park is one of our finest officers," Captain Choi whispered. "She is honored by your grandson's trust." The captain's voice was steady, but Jiwoo could see the tension in his shoulders. He was making this up as he went along, trying to navigate a situation that no human had ever encountered before. Commander Da-eun Kim, the first officer, stood 3 positions down from Jiwoo. Da-eun caught Jiwoo's eye and gave the smallest nod, a gesture of support. "You can do this. We're here." Ambassador Tathra turned to her delegation and spoke in the Valerian language, still keeping her voice low. The other Valerians responded with what sounded like approval, their ears all swiveling forward in the same interested position. "Captain," the ambassador whispered, turning back to face the humans. "My people have a saying, the measure of a civilization is not found in its weapons or its wealth, but in how it treats those who sleep without fear. Your officer could have moved. She could have woken Kirta. Many would have. Kirta." The cub had a name. "Instead," the ambassador continued, "she stands vigil. And you," her gaze swept across the assembled human officers, "you all honor the vigil with her. You whisper so that a child you do not know might sleep in peace." Jiwoo felt the cub shift slightly against her boot. Her leg was already beginning to ache from holding so still, but she did not move. She could not move. Captain Choi inclined his head slightly. "The child's rest is more important than our ceremony, Ambassador." Something changed in the observation deck then. Jiwoo felt it like a shift in air pressure. The Valerian delegation had been formal, almost cold, when they first arrived. Now there was a warmth in their posture, a relaxation in their stance. Ambassador Tathra stepped closer to Captain Choi. When she spoke, her whisper carried a weight that formal pronouncements had not. "We have met with 17 species in the last century, Captain. We have visited their worlds, met their leaders, studied their cultures. We came to your ship expecting to meet warriors. Humans have quite the reputation in this part of space." The captain said nothing, waiting. 17 species, the ambassador repeated. "Powerful civilizations. Advanced technologies. Impressive militaries. And not one of them would have done what your crew is doing right now. Not one of them would have chosen a child's sleep over their own pride and protocol." Jiwoo's leg was definitely going numb now. She shifted her weight as minutely as possible, trying to keep blood flowing without disturbing Kirta. The cub made a small sound and burrowed closer to her boot. Around the observation deck, she could see her fellow officers settling into position. They understood now. This reception would last as long as it took. However many hours it required for the cub to wake naturally, they would stand, and they would whisper, and they would maintain the vigil. Engineering Chief Won-jae Lee stood near the back. He was a broad-shouldered man who rarely showed emotion, but Jiwoo saw him watching the sleeping cub with an expression that was almost tender. Medical Officer Bo-ra Shin had her hand on her medical scanner, discreetly monitoring Jiwoo's vital signs. Bo-ra caught her eye and tapped the scanner twice. A silent message. "You're okay. I'm watching." Security Officer Tae-young-ro stood by the door, alert as always. But even he had softened his stance, moving more slowly, more carefully, so his boots would not make noise against the deck. Ambassador Tathra returned to her delegation. Jiwoo could not hear what the Valarians said to each other, but she saw more of them looking her way. Some were pointing at Kirta. Others seemed to be having intense discussions in whispers too quiet for the translators to catch. Captain Choi moved closer to Jiwoo. When he spoke, his whisper was meant only for her. "Can you hold position, Lieutenant Commander?" "Yes, sir," Ji-woo breathed back. As long as necessary. Good. The captain's face showed the barest hint of a smile. Because I think we just passed a test we didn't know we were taking. Ji-woo's leg throbbed. Her back ached from holding so still. The weight of the sleeping cub against her boot was surprisingly heavy for something so small. But she did not move. She would not move. Not until Kirta woke on his own. Safe, and rested, and protected. The reception continued in whispers. 1 hour into the vigil, Ji-woo's left leg had gone completely numb. She stood as still as a statue, while the whispered diplomatic reception continued around her. Captain Choi was explaining human exploration history to Ambassador Tathra. His voice so quiet that Ji-woo could barely hear him from 5 meters away. The other Valerian delegates had spread out among the human officers, engaging in hushed conversations about trade agreements and cultural exchange programs, all of it conducted in whispers. All of it careful not to wake the sleeping cub pressed against Ji-woo's boot. Kirta had not moved in the last 40 minutes. His small chest rose and fell with perfect regularity. One tiny paw still tucked under his chin. His tail curled around his body like a furry blanket. He looked so peaceful that Ji-woo felt a strange protectiveness rise in her chest. She had never been particularly maternal. Growing up on the outer colonies meant growing up fast, learning to be tough and self-reliant. Her father had raised her alone, after her mother died in a mining accident. He taught her to be strong, to never show weakness, to stand firm against any challenge. But he had also taught her something else. Something she had almost forgotten in her years of military service. Real strength, her father used to say, is knowing when to be gentle. Ji-woo looked down at the sleeping cub. This was gentle. This was strong. Standing here with a numb leg and an aching back, protecting a child's rest. Her father would have been proud. A soft chime sounded from the communication panel near the door. The noise was quiet. But in the hushed observation deck, it sounded like an alarm. Kirta stirred. His ear twitched. Everyone in the room froze. Ji-woo held her breath. If the cub woke now because of a random alert, everything they had worked for would be ruined. Engineering Chief 1J Lee was closest to the panel. He moved faster than Ji-woo had ever seen him move. His large hand covering the speaker in an instant. He tapped the screen with his other hand, silencing the alert and switching the system to visual-only notifications. Kirta settled back into sleep. His breathing remained deep and even. 1J looked at Ji-woo. She mouthed 2 words. Thank you. The big engineer nodded once and returned to his position. But his eyes stayed on the communication panel, watching for any other alerts that might threaten the quiet. Ji-woo realized she was sweating. Not from heat, but from the tension of staying so perfectly still. Every muscle in her body wanted to shift, to move, to find a more comfortable position. She ignored them all. Medical Officer Bo-ra Shin appeared at her side, moving with the careful silence of someone who had spent years working in hospital wards. Bo-ra held up her medical scanner, running it over Ji-woo without saying a word. The scanner's screen showed Ji-woo's vital signs. Elevated heart rate. Muscle strain in the left leg. Signs of fatigue. Bo-ra tapped the screen and showed it to Ji-woo. A message typed in quick, efficient letters. Need stimulant? Ji-woo shook her head minutely. No. She could do this on her own. She would not use chemical help to maintain a vigil for a sleeping child. That felt like cheating. Somehow. Like it would diminish what she was doing. Bo-ra frowned, but did not argue. She typed another message. 2 hours maximum recommended. After that, real risk of falling. Ji-woo gave the smallest nod. She understood. But she also knew she would stand here for however long it took. Even if her legs gave out beneath her, she would collapse before she disturbed Kirta's sleep. Bo-ra seemed to read that determination in her face. The medical officer sighed silently and moved away. But she stayed close, watching, ready to catch Ji-woo if she fell. Across the observation deck, Captain Choi had moved to a different conversation. He was now speaking with a Valerian military commander, discussing ship configurations and defensive capabilities, all in whispers that would not disturb a sleeping child. Commander Da-Un Kim appeared beside the captain with a data tablet. She showed him something on the screen. Ji-woo could not see what it was, but she saw the captain's jaw tighten. Da-Un typed something on the tablet and held it up for the captain to read. He nodded. She typed something else. He shook his head. They were having an entire conversation in written messages, solving some problem that Ji-woo could not see. This was her crew. Adaptable, creative, finding ways to do their jobs even when circumstances made the normal methods impossible. Security Officer Tae-Yang-ro remained by the door. His eyes constantly scanned the room, watching for threats the way he always did. But Ji-woo noticed he had removed his boots. He stood in his socks, reducing even the small sound his footsteps might make. Ambassador Tathra broke away from her conversation with Captain Choi and approached Ji-woo. The Valarian moved with a grace that made no sound at all. She stopped just in front of Ji-woo and looked down at her sleeping grandson. For a long moment, the ambassador said nothing. She simply observed. Her amber eyes moved from Kirta to Ji-woo's face, studying her with an intensity that made Ji-woo want to look away. But she held the ambassador's gaze. "May I speak with you, Lieutenant Commander?" The ambassador whispered. "Of course, Ambassador." Ji-woo breathed back. "Kirta lost his mother 6 months ago," Tathra said quietly. "A ship accident. She was a pilot, one of our finest. The explosion was instantaneous. She felt no pain." Ji-woo's heart clenched. She looked down at the small cub sleeping so trustingly against her boot. "Since then," the ambassador continued, "Kirta has not slept well. He wakes from nightmares. He cannot rest deeply because he is always afraid something bad will happen. I brought him on this mission hoping new surroundings would help, but he has been exhausted for days." The ambassador's voice carried a weight of grief that transcended species. "Loss was loss. Whether you were human or Valarian, this is the first time I have seen him sleep like this," Tathra whispered. Ji-woo did not know what to say. What could she say? That she was sorry for the cub's loss? That she understood grief? Words felt inadequate. Words felt. Instead, she looked down at Kirta and made a silent promise. As long as he slept against her boot, he would be safe. She would stand vigil over him for as long as he needed. "Your species confuses me, Lieutenant Commander," the ambassador said. "We have studied humans from a distance. We have heard stories. You are warriors, fierce fighters who conquered your own world before reaching the stars. You have fought wars among yourselves that devastated entire continents. Your capacity for violence is impressive." 30. RD. The but. Ji-woo said nothing. It was all true. And yet, Tathra continued, "Here you stand. A warrior who chooses not to move because a child sleeps. A soldier who whispers so she will not disturb a rest that is not even her responsibility to guard." "He is a child," Ji-woo whispered back. "That makes it everyone's responsibility." The ambassador's ears swiveled forward. That interested position again. "Explain." "On Earth," Ji-woo said carefully, keeping her voice barely audible. "We have a saying. It takes a village to raise a child. It means that children belong to everyone, not just their parents, not just their family. Everyone has a duty. To protect them, to nurture them, to keep them safe. Even children of other species?" Tathra asked. "Especially then," Ji-woo said. "Because if we cannot protect the innocent, if we cannot show gentleness to those who need it most, then what kind of people are we?" The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then, that deep purring sound started again, rumbling from her chest. "I begin to understand," Tathra whispered, "why your species has survived so long. A commotion near the door drew their attention. Taeyang was blocking someone from entering. Ji-woo could see through the transparent door. A human officer from the lower decks. Someone who had not been briefed on the vigil. He was trying to enter the observation deck, probably to deliver a message. Taeyang held up a hand. Stop. The officer outside looked confused. Taeyang pointed at Ji-woo, then at Kirta sleeping against her boot. Then he put a finger to his lips. Quiet. The officer's eyes went wide. He nodded understanding, handed Taeyang a data tablet through a crack in the door, and left. The entire exchange happened without a single word spoken aloud. Taeyang brought the tablet to Commander Da-eun, who read it and typed a response. The security officer took the tablet back to the door and passed it through to the waiting officer outside. Problem solved. Message delivered. All without disturbing the sleeping cub. Ji-woo felt a surge of pride in her crew. They were doing this. They were actually maintaining a diplomatic reception in complete whispers, conducting ship business through written messages and hand signals. All to honor a custom that was not even their own. Captain Choi approached. Lieutenant Commander, I need verbal authorization to reroute power to the diplomatic quarters. The Valerian delegation requires environmental adjustments. Ji-woo's mind went blank. Verbal authorization required her to speak the authorization codes clearly and distinctly. It was a security protocol. You could not whisper an authorization code. She looked down at Kirta, still sleeping peacefully. Then at the captain. Then at Ambassador Tathra, who watched with those unreadable amber eyes. 1J appeared from nowhere with a data tablet. He had already prepared an alternative. A written authorization form, usually reserved for situations where officers were unable to speak. Medical emergencies, hostile boarding actions, situations where silence was required. This qualified. Ji-woo took the stylus and signed the digital form, adding her authorization code in written form. 1J nodded and disappeared again, moving toward the engineering station to implement the power rerouting. Creative solution, Lieutenant Commander, Captain Choi whispered. There might have been the smallest hint of amusement in his voice. Creative situation, sir, Ji-woo whispered back. Her leg had progressed from numb to painful. A sharp, needle-like sensation that meant blood flow was being restricted. She shifted her weight as minutely as possible, trying to ease the pressure without moving her boot. Kirta sighed in his sleep. A small, contented sound. His tail uncurled slightly, the tip brushing against Ji-woo's other boot. She smiled. The pain did not matter. The discomfort did not matter. This small creature trusted her enough to sleep without fear. That was worth any amount of physical discomfort. Ambassador Tathra saw the smile. You genuinely do not mind, do you? Standing there, unable to move. No, Ambassador, Ji-woo whispered honestly. I don't mind at all. The vigil continued. 2 hours and 17 minutes into the vigil, something unexpected happened. A second Valerian cub approached Commander Da-eun Kim. The child was slightly larger than Kirta, with darker fur and bright green eyes. She had been watching the sleeping cub against Ji-woo's boot for the last 20 minutes, her small head tilted in curiosity. Now she walked directly to Da-eun and sat down beside the commander's feet. Da-eun froze. Her eyes went wide. She looked at Ji-woo with an expression that clearly said, "What do I do?" Ji-woo could not help. She was still locked in position, Kirta sleeping peacefully against her boot. All she could do was watch as the small cub leaned against Da-eun's leg, closed her eyes, and began to purr softly. Within minutes, the cub was asleep. Ambassador Tathra watched this development with great interest. She whispered something to another Valerian delegate, who responded with what sounded like approval. Then the ambassador addressed the entire observation deck, her voice still quiet but carrying authority. It seems the Cubs have decided to test more than one of your officers. Let us see how humanity responds when the vigil multiplies. Captain Choi's expression remained neutral, but Ji-woo knew him well enough to see the calculation happening behind his eyes. 2 officers now immobilized. How many more before ship operations became impossible? The captain caught her eye. She gave him the smallest nod. We can do this. 3 minutes later, a third cub approached Medical Officer Bo-ra Shin. This one was the smallest yet, barely reaching Bo-ra's knee. The tiny cub looked up at the medical officer with enormous amber eyes, made a small chirping sound, and climbed onto Bo-ra's boot like it was a comfortable chair. Bo-ra's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, panic. Then, slowly, tenderness. She looked down at the cub settling onto her boot and very carefully adjusted her stance to provide a more stable platform. The cub purred and closed its eyes. 4 minutes after that, a fourth cub wandered over to Engineering Chief Won-jae Lee. This cub was bold, walking right up to the big engineer and bumping its head against his hand. Won-jae looked terrified. His large hands, so skilled at repairing complex machinery, hovered uncertainly over the small creature. The cub bumped his hand again, a clear demand. "Pet me." Won-jae very carefully, very gently, placed his hand on the cub's head. The cub immediately began purring, a sound like a small engine. Then it flopped down across Won-jae's boots and went to sleep, apparently satisfied. The engineer looked like he might cry. His jaw worked silently, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. Ji-woo remembered what she knew about Won-jae's past. He had lost his daughter years ago, before joining the Eternal Horizon. A colony accident. She had been 7 years old. Now he stood with a small alien child sleeping across his boots, and the pain and healing on his face was visible to anyone who looked. The fifth cub chose Captain Choi. The captain was in the middle of a whispered discussion with a Valerian military commander when the small creature simply walked up and sat down in front of him. The cub looked up at the captain with an expression that somehow conveyed both expectation and challenge. The captain looked down. The cub looked up. Neither moved. Then the cub stood on its back legs and placed both front paws on the captain's knee, clearly requesting to be picked up. Captain Choi was a military officer with 30 years of experience. He had commanded starships through hostile territory. He had made decisions that affected thousands of lives. He had faced down pirates and navigated political nightmares that would have destroyed lesser leaders. He bent down and very carefully picked up the small cub. The cub immediately curled into his arms, tucked its head under his chin, and went to sleep. The captain stood there, holding the sleeping child, his arms locked in position, his expression a mixture of pride and absolute terror. He met Ji-woo's eyes across the observation deck. She tried not to smile. The captain, holding a sleeping cub like it was a live explosive device. It would have been funny if the diplomatic stakes were not so high. Ambassador Tathra approached Captain Choi. Her expression was softer now than it had been when the delegation first arrived. There was warmth in her amber eyes. 5 cubs, she whispered. 5 of your officers, all maintaining the vigil. We will maintain it as long as necessary, Ambassador. The captain whispered back. The cub in his arms shifted slightly, and he adjusted his hold with surprising gentleness. I need to tell you something, Captain, Tathra said quietly. Something you deserve to know. The captain waited. We have done this before. The ambassador continued. Not exactly this, but similar tests. We visit species who seek alliance with us. We bring the cubs. We watch how your people react to children, to innocence, to vulnerability. Ji-woo felt her stomach tighten. A test. This had been a test all along. The Dorsian Collective, Tathra said, naming a powerful civilization that controlled 70 star systems. They saw the cubs as weakness. They suggested we leave the children on our ships where they would be safe from harm. They could not understand why we would bring young ones to a diplomatic function. The ambassador's ears flattened slightly. A sign Ji-woo had learned meant disapproval. The Empyrean dynasty offered to have their servants watch the cubs in a separate room. They treated our children like inconvenient baggage to be stored away. Politely, of course, with great courtesy, but the message was clear. Children did not belong in important discussions. And the Krithani swarm? Captain Choi asked. They ignored the cubs completely, Tathra said. Stepped around them, walked past them as if they were furniture. When one cub tried to engage with a Krithani delegate, they were dismissed. Gently, but dismissed nonetheless. The ambassador looked around the observation deck. At Jiwoo, still standing vigil over Kirta. At Daun, with a cub against her leg. At Bo-Ra, with a tiny child on her boot. At Wonjae, with a cub across his feet. At the captain himself, holding a sleeping bundle in his arms. 17 species. Tathra whispered. 17 different civilizations. Some more advanced than yours. Some more powerful. Some with longer histories among the stars. And not one of them did what you are doing right now. What are we doing, Ambassador? The captain asked quietly. You are choosing the children over everything else, Tathra said. Over protocol, over comfort, over efficiency. You saw cubs begin to sleep, and without question. Security Officer Taeyang Ro had been listening from his position by the door. He stepped forward, still moving silently in his socked feet. Ambassador, he whispered. Where I come from, there is an old saying. The true measure of a society is how it treats those who cannot fight back. Children cannot fight back. So we fight for them instead. We have a similar saying, Tathra replied. And yet, in all our travels, we have found few who actually live by it. Commander Daun spoke up, her voice barely audible with the cub sleeping against her leg. May I ask a question, Ambassador? Of course. What would have happened if we had failed this test? Tathra's expression grew serious. We would have concluded that humanity, despite its many strengths, was not ready for alliance. We would have withdrawn our delegation and added your species to the list of those we cannot trust with what matters most to us. And now? Captain Choi asked. Now, the ambassador said. And that deep purring rumble started in her chest again. Now we see something different. Something rare. You are warriors. Yes, but you are warriors who know when to be gentle. You are strong, but you use that strength to protect rather than to dominate. Jiwoo's leg had progressed beyond pain into a strange numbness that worried her. But Kirta still slept peacefully. And that was all that mattered. She watched the ambassador speaking with the captain and felt a deep sense of connection forming. Not just between species, but between individuals who shared the same fundamental values. Children mattered. Their rest mattered. Their peace mattered. More than efficiency. More than protocol. More than anything else. Bo-Ra caught Jiwoo's attention and held up her medical scanner. The message on the screen was clear. Muscle damage imminent. Need to shift weight. Jiwoo shook her head minutely. Not yet. Not while Kirta sleeps. Bora's face showed frustration, but she did not argue. Instead, she moved closer, positioning herself to catch Jiwoo if her leg gave out. A silent promise. I will not let you fall. Wonjae was having his own struggle. The cub across his boots had shifted position, putting pressure on the engineer's right foot. His face showed the strain of maintaining position, but his hands remained gentle where they rested at his sides, ready to steady the cub if needed. The captain adjusted his hold on his sleeping bundle. The cub made a small sound and burrowed closer to his chest. For just a moment, the captain's military bearings softened. He looked down at the child in his arms with an expression of wonder. How long will they sleep? He whispered to Ambassador Tathra. Cubs this age, when they feel truly safe, can sleep for 3 to 4 hours. The ambassador replied. Jiwoo did the math. They were already 2 hours into the vigil. Potentially 2 more hours to go. Her leg would not last that long. She knew it. Bo-Ra knew it. But she would stand until she physically could not stand anymore. Ambassador, Captain Choi said quietly, regardless of how long this takes, please know that we consider it an honor to stand vigil over your cubs. They will sleep as long as they need, and we will be here when they wake. Tathra inclined her head. "I believe you, Captain." And that belief changes everything. The observation deck fell back into whispered conversations. Diplomatic discussions continued around the 5 immobilized officers. Treaties were discussed. Trade agreements were outlined. Cultural exchange programs were proposed. All of it conducted in voices barely louder than breathing. All to protect the sleep of 5 small cubs. Jiwoo felt her vision blur slightly. Fatigue. Muscle strain. The physical toll of standing so still for so long. She blinked hard, forcing clarity back. Kirta shifted against her boot. His small paw flexed, claws extending and retracting in a dream. But he did not wake. Jiwoo looked around at her fellow officers. All of them trapped in the same vigil. All of them choosing this burden willingly. Her crew. Her family. And in that moment, she understood what Ambassador Tathra had been saying. This was what humanity could be. Not just warriors. Not just explorers or builders or dreamers. But protectors. Guardians of the innocent. People who would stand until they fell. If that was what protecting a child required. The vigil continued. 3 hours into the vigil, Ji-woo began to understand what her limits truly were. Her left leg no longer responded properly to commands from her brain. The numbness had spread from her foot all the way to her hip. She could still stand, but only because her right leg bore most of her weight, and her military training had taught her body how to lock joints and maintain position even when exhausted. Kirta continued sleeping peacefully against her boot, unaware of the strain his rest was causing. Across the observation deck, her fellow officers showed similar signs of fatigue. Commander Da-eun's face had gone pale. Medical Officer Bo-ra swayed slightly, catching herself before the movement could disturb the cub on her boot. Engineering Chief Wan-jae's jaw was clenched tight enough that Ji-woo could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Only Captain Choi seemed relatively stable. Though that might have been because holding the cub in his arms distributed the weight more evenly than having one pressed against a boot. Still, his arms had to be screaming by now. 3 hours of holding a 10-pound weight without shifting position would exhaust even the strongest person. Ambassador Tathra noticed their struggle. She approached Captain Choi with an expression that might have been concern. "Captain, I must tell you that you can end the vigil at any time," she whispered. "Your officers have already proven themselves beyond any doubt. If you need to wake the cubs for their safety, we would understand." "No, Ambassador," the captain whispered back. His voice was firm despite the strain visible in his posture. "The cubs are safe. They will sleep as long as they need." A soft chime from the communications panel drew everyone's attention. Tae-young moved to silence it. But this time, the alert was marked priority. It could not be simply dismissed. The security officer looked at Captain Choi. The captain nodded. Tae-young accepted the communication, routing it to a handheld device that he brought to the captain. Ji-woo watched as the captain read whatever message had come through. His expression darkened. He typed a response one-handed, the other arm still cradling the sleeping cub. Then, he gestured for Commander Da-eun to approach. Da-eun limped over, her movements stiff from standing so long with a cub against her leg. The captain showed her the device. Her eyes widened. They had a whispered conversation that Ji-woo could not hear. Then, Da-eun pulled out her own tablet and began typing furiously, working around the cub that still leaned against her leg. Something was happening. Something outside the observation deck. 5 minutes later, Ji-woo found out what. A holographic display activated at the front of the room. Ambassador Tathra had authorized it, apparently deciding that visual information was acceptable as long as it made no sound to disturb the cubs. The display showed a news feed, Galactic News Network. The headline made Ji-woo's breath catch. "Humanity passes the vigil. Valerian Alliance likely." Below the headline, images showed the observation deck. Someone had been recording them. Video of Ji-woo, standing perfectly still with Kirta against her boot. Images of the captain holding a cub. Footage of all 5 officers maintaining the vigil, while the diplomatic reception continued in whispers around them. The newsfeed was not limited to human networks. Jiwoo saw that it had been picked up by Dorsian media, Empyrean Dynasty news services, even the Krithani swarm communication channels. The entire galaxy was watching them stand vigil over sleeping cubs. Ambassador Tathra addressed the room, still keeping her voice to a whisper. "Captain, I apologize. One of my aides thought this moment should be shared with our home world. They did not realize the recording would spread so quickly through galactic networks. Maimanda. Thanks for watching. I'm Mytinan Town. Is it causing problems, Ambassador?" Captain Choi asked quietly. "On the contrary," Tathra replied. "It is causing quite the sensation. We have received communications from 17 different species in the last hour alone. Many expressing surprise. Some expressing, let us call it, embarrassment." Jiwoo understood. The species that had failed the test were now watching humanity pass it. That had to sting. More news feeds appeared on the display. Analysis from political experts. Commentary from xenobiologists. Discussion of what this meant for galactic diplomacy. One headline caught Jiwoo's attention. "Human warriors choose gentleness. Other species take note." She felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. They were not doing this for recognition. They were doing it because it was right. Because a child was sleeping, and children deserved to sleep without fear. But she could not deny the impact. The whole galaxy was watching humans be gentle. After years of humanity being known primarily for their military capabilities and aggressive expansion, here was a different image. Warriors who whispered. Soldiers who stood vigil. Strength used for protection, rather than domination. Another communication came through. Captain Choi read it and actually smiled, though the expression was strained by exhaustion. "That was Terran Federation Command," he whispered to Ambassador Tathra. "They want to know why our diplomatic schedule is hours behind the planned timeline." "What will you tell them?" the ambassador asked. "I already told them," the captain replied. "I said we are building a future, and that is worth more than any schedule." Jiwoo felt her vision blur again. Not from fatigue this time, but from emotion. She was proud to serve under this captain. Proud to be part of this crew. Proud to be human in this moment. Her leg buckled. It happened so fast that she barely registered it. One moment she was standing. The next, she was falling. Her numb leg simply gave out beneath her. Bo-Ra moved with the speed of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. The medical officer caught Jiwoo before she hit the ground, supporting her weight and carefully lowering her to a kneeling position. Kirta did not wake. The transition from Jiwoo standing to Jiwoo kneeling was smooth enough that the cub simply resettled against her boot. Still sleeping peacefully, Jiwoo knelt there, breathing hard, Bo-Ra's hands still steadying her. The medical officer whispered directly in her ear, "You can maintain the vigil from this position. Rest. Let your leg recover." Jiwoo nodded. Kneeling took the pressure off her damaged leg while still allowing her to keep the vigil. She adjusted her position carefully, making sure Kirta remained undisturbed. Ambassador Tathra watched this adaptation with evident approval. "Your medical officer is wise," she whispered to Captain Choi. "And your xenobiologist is dedicated. 3 hours standing vigil. I am not sure I could have done the same." "She would have stood until she fell unconscious," the captain replied quietly. "They all would. That is who they are." On the holographic display, more news feeds appeared. Analysis of human psychology. Speculation about what this meant for human-Valerian relations. Interviews with political leaders from various species. One feed showed a Dorsian official being asked about the Valerian test. The official's response was defensive, claiming that the Dorsians had different cultural values and could not be judged by Valerian standards. Another showed an Empyrean dynasty diplomat arguing that practical considerations sometimes had to outweigh sentiment, and that dedicating resources to childcare during diplomatic functions was inefficient. The Krithani swarm representative simply stated that the swarm had no comment on how other species conducted their diplomacy. all of them making excuses for failing a test that humanity had passed without even knowing it was a test. Commander Daun suddenly gasped. The sound was barely audible, but in the quiet observation deck, it drew attention. The cub against her leg stirred. Everyone froze. Daun went absolutely still. The cub shifted, stretched, and then settled back down without waking. Daun let out a breath so quietly it was almost inaudible. Bora was at her side in an instant, scanner in hand, checking the commander's condition. The scanner's results showed what Ji-woo already suspected. Muscle strain, fatigue, signs of a body pushed past comfortable limits. Bora showed Daun the scanner and typed a quick message. Daun read it and shook her head. No. She would continue the vigil. Won-jae was struggling too. The big engineer's face had gone red with effort. The cub across his boots was heavier than the others, and 3 hours of immobility was taking its toll. But he did not move. He did not complain. He simply stood. Ji-woo saw him blink rapidly, clearing tears from his eyes. Was this vigil for the Valerian cub, or for the human child he could no longer protect? Maybe it was for both. Captain Choi's arms were shaking now. Tiny tremors that he could not quite suppress. The cub in his arms was sleeping so deeply that it did not notice. But Ji-woo noticed. Everyone noticed. Ambassador Tathra noticed too. She stepped closer to the captain. I must insist, Captain. Your officers are in pain. End the vigil. We will not think less of you. No, Ambassador, the captain whispered. His voice was steady even though his arms shook. When the cubs wake naturally, the vigil ends. Not before. Why? Tathra asked. Why push yourselves like this? The captain looked down at the cub in his arms. When he spoke, his whisper carried a depth of feeling that surprised Ji-woo. Because these cubs lost their mothers, Ambassador. You told us that. They have experienced loss and fear and uncertainty. And somehow, for reasons I do not fully understand, they feel safe with us, safe enough to sleep without fear. He looked up, meeting Tathra's eyes. How can we betray that trust? How can we say their rest matters less than our comfort? These cubs did not choose to lose their mothers, but we can choose to protect them now. In this small way. So we choose to stand vigil. The observation deck was silent, except for the quiet breathing of sleeping cubs and exhausted officers. Ambassador Tathra's ears were fully forward, her amber eyes bright with emotion that might have been tears. 17 species, she whispered. 17 civilizations. And not one of them said what you just said. Not one of them understood what you understand. She turned to address her entire delegation, still keeping her voice low. We came here to test humanity, to see if they were worthy of alliance. I think we have our answer. The Valerian delegates all made that purring sound, a chorus of approval that rumbled through the observation deck, but was not loud enough to wake the sleeping cubs. On the holographic display, the news feeds continued updating. More species watching. More commentary. More analysis. But inside the observation deck, all that mattered was the vigil. 5 human officers, pushed to their limits, maintaining a promise that no one had asked them to make, protecting the sleep of cubs who were not their own, standing guard over the rest of children they had just met, choosing gentleness when they could have chosen efficiency. Ji-woo looked at Kirta, still sleeping peacefully against her boot. Her leg was damaged. Her body was exhausted. But her heart was full. This was what humanity could be at its best. Warriors who knew when to be gentle. Soldiers who understood that true strength sometimes meant standing perfectly still so a child could sleep. The vigil continued. 3 hours and 42 minutes into the vigil, Kirta began to wake. Ji-woo felt him stir against her boot. His small body stretched, his tail uncurling. His breathing changed from the deep rhythm of sleep to something lighter, more aware. She looked down and met amber eyes blinking up at her in the soft light of the observation deck. For a moment, neither moved. The cub stared at her. She stared back, barely breathing. Then Kirta made a small chirping sound and stood on his back legs, reaching up toward her with both paws. Jiwoo's heart melted. Without thinking, she reached down and picked up the small cub. Her left leg screamed in protest at the movement after so long standing still. But she ignored it. Kirta was awake, and he wanted to be held. The cub curled into her arms exactly as he had curled against her boot. But now those big amber eyes looked up at her face with something that might have been trust, or affection, or maybe just the sleepy contentment of a child who had rested well. "Hello, little one," Jiwoo whispered. Kirta purred. The sound vibrated through his small body and into her arms. Then, he tucked his head under her chin and closed his eyes again, not sleeping, but simply comfortable. Ambassador Tathra appeared at Jiwoo's side. The older Valerian looked at her grandson in the human officer's arms with an expression of profound emotion. "You are the first face he saw upon waking," Tathra said softly. "In our culture, this creates a bond. The one who guards the sleep and greets the waking becomes. There is no direct translation. The closest would be guardian spirit, someone who will always be connected to the child's safety and well-being." Jiwoo looked down at Kirta. He seemed perfectly content in her arms, purring quietly. "I would be honored," she whispered. Around the observation deck, the other cubs began to wake as well. The cub against Commander Da-Yoon's leg stretched and chirped. Da-Yoon carefully picked her up, cradling the small creature with surprising gentleness for someone who had spent most of her career dealing with ship operations and tactical decisions. The tiny cub on Medical Officer Bo-Ra's boot woke next. Bo-Ra knelt down, her damaged legs finally getting relief, and let the cub climb into her lap. The small creature looked up at Bo-Ra's face and made a trilling sound that seemed to express approval. Wonjae's cub woke with energy, immediately standing and stretching like it had not just slept for nearly 4 hours. The engineer looked down at the small creature with an expression of wonder. The cub looked up at him and chirped demandingly. Wonjae very carefully reached down and picked it up. His large hands completely engulfed the small body. But his touch was infinitely gentle. Captain Choi's cub was the last to wake. The small creature had been sleeping so deeply that even the sounds of the other cubs stirring did not immediately disturb it. When it finally opened its eyes, it looked up at the captain's face and made a sound that was almost like laughter. A happy, burbling chirp. The captain smiled. It was a real smile, warm and genuine, nothing like his usual professional expression. He adjusted his hold on the cub, bringing it closer to his chest. All 5 cubs, all 5 officers, all awake now, and all bonded in a way that would last a lifetime. Ambassador Tathra addressed the observation deck, her voice no longer a whisper. The vigil was over. Normal sound levels were permitted. "Captain Choi, officers of the Eternal Horizon, you have done something unprecedented. You have honored the sleep vigil in a way that no other species has done. You have proven that humanity understands what matters most." She gestured to the cubs in the officer's arms. "These cubs have chosen you as their guardian spirits. In Valerian culture, this is a sacred bond. You are now part of our family, not through treaty or alliance, but through something deeper, through trust." The Valerian delegation approached, each member touching the foreheads of the human officers in what Jiwoo recognized as a gesture of deep respect. Captain Choi stepped forward, still holding his cub. When he spoke, his voice was clear and firm. "Ambassador, we are honored by this bond. We did not maintain the vigil for political gain or diplomatic advantage. We did it because these cubs deserve to sleep safely, and we had the ability to protect that sleep." "I know," Tathra replied. "That is why it matters." One of the Valerian aides approached with what looked like small containers of bioluminescent ink. Tathra took one and turned to Jiwoo. "May I?" the ambassador asked. Jiwoo nodded, not entirely sure what was happening, but trusting the process. Tathra dipped a claw into the ink and very carefully drew a pattern on Jiwoo's forehead. The ink glowed, a soft blue-green, warm against her skin. The ambassador repeated the process with each of the 5 officers, marking them all with the same glowing symbol. "This is the mark of the guardian spirit," Tathra explained. "It will fade in a few days, but its meaning will last forever. You are now recognized across all Valerian space as protectors of cubs. Any Valerian child can approach you seeking safety, and you are honor-bound to provide it." Jiwoo felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was not a burden. It was a privilege. Medical Officer Bo-Ra finally got to properly examine the officers she had been worried about for nearly 4 hours. She ran her scanner over each of them, making notes and shaking her head at the results. "Jiwoo needs physical therapy for muscle damage in her left leg," Bo-Ra announced. "Da-eun has severe muscle strain. 1J is dehydrated and showing signs of blood pressure irregularities. The captain has tendon inflammation in both arms. Worth it," Jiwoo said quietly. The other officers nodded in agreement. Kirta chirped from her arms, as if agreeing with her assessment. The holographic display was still active, still showing news feeds from across the galaxy. The headlines had changed now. Valerian alliance, with humanity confirmed. Guardian spirits. 5 humans bonded to Valerian cubs. Diplomatic breakthrough. Humanity passes ancient test. But there were other headlines too. Ones that showed the broader impact of what had happened. Dorsian Collective reconsiders approach to Valerian relations. Empyrean Dynasty announces new cultural sensitivity training. Krithani swarms silent on Valerian incident. The galaxy had watched. The galaxy had taken note. Humanity had done something that powerful civilizations, with longer histories and greater resources, had failed to do. Not through superior technology or military might, but through simple compassion and respect. Ambassador Tathra gestured for attention. When the observation deck was quiet, she made a formal announcement. "On behalf of the Valerian Coalition, and by the authority vested in me as ambassador, I hereby propose a formal alliance between our people and humanity. Not just a trade agreement, not just a non-aggression pact, a true alliance. Family." Captain Choi straightened despite his exhausted body and injured arms. The cub in his embrace seemed perfectly happy to be part of this historic moment. "On behalf of humanity and the Terran Federation, I accept this proposal. We are honored to be considered family." The Valerian delegation erupted in that purring sound, louder now that there were no sleeping cubs to disturb. It filled the observation deck with a rumbling music that spoke of approval and joy. Jiwoo felt tears on her cheeks. Happy tears. Exhausted tears. Tears of relief and pride, and a dozen other emotions she could not quite name. Kirta looked up at her wet face and chirped in what sounded like concern. She smiled down at him. "I'm okay, little one. These are good tears." The cub seemed to accept this, snuggling back against her chest. Over the next hour, the observation deck transformed from a diplomatic reception into something warmer, something more like a family gathering. The Valerian delegates mingled freely with the human officers. Cubs played with willing volunteers. Laughter, mixed with purring, mixed with conversation. 1J sat on the floor, his cub climbing all over him like he was a piece of playground equipment. The engineer's face showed more emotion than Jiwoo had seen in the 3 years she had known him. Joy, healing, a kind of peace that came from caring for a child again. Da-eun was teaching her cub hand games, the small creature fascinated by the patterns of fingers and palms. The commander's usual stern efficiency had melted away, replaced by patience and playfulness. Bo-Ra had her tiny cub sleeping in her lap again, but this time she was able to sit comfortably while the child rested. She stroked the soft fur with gentle fingers, her medical training making her touch both soothing and expert. Captain Choi had surrendered completely to his cub's demands for play. The small creature was trying to climb up his dress uniform, and the captain was carefully steadying it while pretending to be a mountain. His officers watched with barely concealed amusement. Jiwoo held Kirta close and watched her crew interact with the cubs they had guarded. These were warriors. Every one of them had combat training. Everyone could handle a weapon, command troops, make the hard decisions that military service required. And every one of them was gentle with the cubs in their care. That was humanity's strength. Not the ability to be fierce, though they had that. Not the capacity for violence, though they had that too. But the ability to choose, to be warriors when necessary and protectors when possible. To know that true strength sometimes meant standing still so a child could sleep. Ambassador Tathra approached Jiwoo. Kirta chirped, happily at seeing his grandmother. "Your crew has given me hope, Lieutenant Commander," the ambassador said. "Hope that perhaps this galaxy can be better than it has been. That perhaps strength and gentleness can coexist." "They always have, Ambassador," Jiwoo replied. "Sometimes people just forget which one to use when." Tathra's ears swiveled forward. "Wise words. I begin to understand why Kirta chose you for his guardian spirit." The cub in question made a demanding sound and reached toward his grandmother. Jiwoo carefully transferred him to Tathra's arms. The ambassador held her grandson close, purring softly. "He has not slept so well since we lost his mother," Tathra said quietly. "Thank you for giving him that peace, even if only for a few hours." "We will always protect his sleep, Ambassador," Jiwoo promised. "Whenever he needs it, wherever we are." That is what guardian spirits do. Later, as the Valerian delegation prepared to leave the observation deck, the 5 bonded cubs made it very clear they did not want to be separated from their guardian spirits. Kirta clung to Jiwoo's uniform. Da-eun's cub wrapped around her leg and refused to let go. The captain's cub had fallen back asleep in his arms and could not be woken without breaking protocol again. Ambassador Tathra laughed, a sound like wind chimes mixed with purring. "It seems the cubs have decided their guardian spirits should stay close. Captain, would your officers be willing to quarter with the cubs tonight? It would ease the transition." "Of course," Captain Choi replied, carefully adjusting his sleeping burden. "We are family now. Family stays together." As Jiwoo left the observation deck with Kirta in her arms, she passed a viewport showing the stars beyond. Out there, the galaxy was watching. Watching humanity be gentle. Watching warriors choose compassion. She looked down at the small cub purring in her arms and smiled. Let them watch. Let them see what humanity could be. Not just fighters or explorers or builders, but protectors, guardians. People who understood that the strongest thing you could do was stand vigil over a sleeping child. Kirta chirped softly, his small paw touching her cheek. "Sleep well, little one," Jiwoo whispered. "I'll keep you safe." And she would. They all would. Because that was what it meant to be human. To choose kindness when you could choose power. To choose protection when you could choose control. To choose love when you could choose fear. The vigil had ended, but the bonds it created would last forever. In the vast emptiness of space, on a ship called the Eternal Horizon, 5 human officers held 5 alien cubs and promised to protect them always. And the galaxy, watching, began to understand that humanity was not just another warrior race. They were something far more dangerous and far more wonderful. They were hope.